Will Chris Eubank Jr. continue the legacy of his father and defeat Conor Benn, or will Conor Benn avenge his father's losses and get revenge for Nigel Benn? What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Fight Franchise and a different type of video, boxing content. I've always wanted to do boxing content. I'm a huge boxing fan, but it's just been, I'm busy in the time, but I feel like there's not much on with the MMA world and I didn't really have any idea. So I thought, why not cover this exciting fight within the UK boxing scene, one of the most hyped fights in the UK boxing scene, a true rivalry. This feels like a title fight without a title on the line. It's going to be an amazing matchup at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, and I cannot wait for it. You know, Chris Eubank Jr. at the tail end of his career, you know, can he get one big win to stamp off his career? Conor Benn on the come up, trying to make a name for himself, you know, 28 years old. Can he build up and become a face in boxing? He needs to defeat and knock out Chris Eubank Jr. to do that, but will he be able to do that jumping up 2 weight classes? Going to kind of give my tale of the tape, preview and prediction of the fight, how I think the fight going to go, and just tell the picture of how we got here. So Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn, both the sons of legendary boxers Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank Sr., were both had legendary wars in the 90s. You know, the fathers, they had some excellent fights. The first fight, Chris Eubank Sr. won, and the second fight was fought to a draw, where many people thought Nigel should have got the decision in that one. Now it's the sons' turn to live up to the legendary legacy of their fathers, but can they, you know, deliver the war that their fathers had? Both sons have had interesting careers and kind of, you know, made a name for themselves. I'm going to kind of break that down. But before we get into that, going to give you the tale of the tape of both guys. Chris Eubank Jr., 35 years old. Conor Benn, 28 years old. Eubank Jr. coming to the tail end of his career now. 1 or 2 more last big fights maybe left in him before he fizzles out. Whereas in Eubank Jr., he, you know, fought to the highest level. He fought Groves, fought Billy Joe, but he never got into that upper echelon, which we thought he would. There was rumoured bouts, you know, he was going to fight Gennady Golovkin at one point. He should be glad that never happened, because I feel like Golovkin would have took his head off. As for Conor Benn, 28 years old, young, coming up in his career, had his career kind of halted as he was hitting progress due to a PED violation where he was suspended for fighting in the UK, had 2 fights in America, which wasn't the best, but he's now coming into his own. Will he be able to live up to his promise and the hype he's had? Chris Eubank Jr., 5'11", 5'8" is Conor Benn. Eubank Jr. is the much bigger guy, shown by the fact he's fighting at middleweight and super middleweight, whereas Conor Benn is fighting at 147, about featherweight. So yeah, Conor Benn, much smaller guy. 72.5-inch reach for Chris Eubank Jr., 68-inch reach for Conor Benn. So, yeah, Eubank's got the reach advantage in this fight, but he needs to use it to his advantage where he can keep him on the end of his jab, not let Benn get in close where he can do the damage, you know, in the pocket where he's throwing a bunch of punches. 34 wins, 3 losses, 25 KOs are those 34 wins for Chris Eubank. Conor Benn, 23 wins, 0 losses, undefeated, 14 KOs. You know, when we look at the KO streaks recently of both guys, it looked like Conor Benn was on this vicious KO streak, but then most recently in his 2 last performances went to some lackluster kind of decisions. So going to kind of break down both guys' career and how we got here. So Chris Eubank Jr., we'll start off with him. Both sons have had interesting careers. Eubank Jr., you know, comes up with a lot of promise and has some great wins where, you know, he gets matched up with his British rival, Billy Joe Saunders, where Saunders won a split decision and Eubank, you know, lost his undefeated streak for the first time, where for the most part at that point of his career, he was being coached by his dad, Eubank Sr. And in that Billy Joe fight, his dad was not even coaching him. He was acting. He was putting on an act and just showboating for some reason, where in that fight, you know, Eubank Jr. could have done with some real, like, knowledge in the corner, some actual tactics, a proper coach, as you would say, but Eubank Sr. is just, like, fluttering around, acting like it's about him, where Eubank Jr. is in the corner, he's probably, like, asking for, like, tell me what to do, where Billy Joe kind of cruises the first kind of start of the fight, but he tires towards the end, where Eubank kind of took over towards the end and had his dad given him some real good advice, or a coach giving him some real good advice, he could have maybe won that fight and we would have been looking at a different trajectory of his career. You know, it was Billy Joe who went on and had the great career and ended up fighting Canelo. Chris Eubank Jr. never got to that level. So, you know, if Chris Eubank Jr. could have won that fight, it could have been a whole different career and a trajectory he could have gone on. After that fight, you know, he built himself back up and then he would go from middleweight, you know, up to super middleweight and get some good wins. And entering, you know, a boxing tournament at the time, which was really entertaining, the Super Series, the Ali Super Series, where, you know, he would, if you don't know what the Ali Super Series was, they had like different divisions, weight classes where they'd do an 8-man tournament and people could go through. Alexander Usyk won the cruiserweight tournament, if I remember correctly. But in his first bout, Chris Eubanks in the super middleweight tournament with some great fighters, he, in his first bout, faces Yildirim and he wins via KO. And then in the semi-finals, he faces George Groves where he loses a decision. No shame in that. George Groves is an excellent fighter and, you know, had a lot of good experience in his own right. But he just couldn't hack it up against him. Then he went back down to middleweight where he was supposed to fight Conor Benn originally. And there was a lot of hype and bad blood going into the fight then. Way more now. But Conor Benn pulls out. Well, he doesn't pull out. He gets caught for using performance-enhancing drug where he's been pulled from the fight. And, you know, Chris Eubank Jr. scolds him, you know, in the media and the press conferences and goes, okay, I'm going to have to move on from this. And then he gets into a fight with another British rival. He gets into a rivalry with Liam Smith, where they squared off in 2 bouts back-to-back. When the first bout, you know, Liam Smith comes in and KOs are, you know, confident and arrogant. Eubank Jr., both guys were arrogant, but it seemed like Eubank was just a bit more arrogant in his fight style and in the fight, where he gets caught by a KO in the 4th round, gets brutally finished for the first time in his career. And then they would rematch where he would KO him in the 10th round, where Eubank showed, okay, that was me on an off night, being cocky and underestimating my opponent. He went back in there and, you know, got the TKO in the 10th round. And then most recently, he fought on a card in Saudi Arabia against Zerameta, where he got the KO in the 7th round. And kind of now he's earned, well, he's not earned, but he's got the Conor Benn fight. But ups and downs, peaks and troughs in his career. But the one thing you look at when you look at Chris Eubank Jr.'s career, you go, did you live up to your expectations? Could you have given more? Was you a kind of nepo baby who lived off the coattails of your father and just kind of got into the sport? Or are you a well-worthy fighter who's deserving of his father's name and father's legacy and has lived up to the expectations? Or could he have given more? A very interesting career for Chris Eubank Jr. As for Conor Benn, you know, he's had a perfect career, undefeated, but with controversy, debuting in 2016, winning all 6 bouts, then fighting in 2017, having 4 bouts and winning all of them via KO. And then towards the end of the year in 2017, you know, has one more bout, his 5th bout versus Frenchman Paynaud. He fights Paynaud where Paynaud sent him down and dropped him, and he dropped him again where it looked like a slip for Ben, but he dropped him again where it was his closest fight up to date, wherein they had a rematch after. And if you see, Ben won the controversial decision, but after the fight against the Frenchman, you know, Ben's face is all kind of busted up, and it was the most busted up he's been in the octagon. So has a rematch where they rematch for a continental welterweight title, and Ben beat Paynaud by a decision, and his, you know, father said, you know, if he can't get past this Frenchman, what business does he have being in the USYK? He should go back and be a bricklayer or a carpenter or a painter and decorator. So it gets past him, and then slowly he's built a resume of good wins and good stoppages, you know, in the welterweight division, defending his, you know, continental title. But he's never ever gone to that upper echelon of, you know, fighters and worked his way through the division. But he got some brilliant wins, you know. He started coming into his own with his aggression and his power, securing some brilliant KOs and stoppages along the way. And then, obviously, he was touted to have the bout versus Eubank Jr., but he was suspended due to PEDs, performance-enhancing drugs. And that brought a kind of stop to his career, a halt to his career, where he couldn't fight within the UK, but he was cleared and sanctioned to fight in the America. He fought in America in 2 lackluster decisions where he didn't show the same power. He showed the ferocity. Conor Benn, he's a ferocious fighter. He's a bit of an animal. He kind of gets in there and he's throwing hell for leather. But recently he had those 2 fights where he fought to a decision, and he didn't have that same pop in his shot. He didn't have that same KO power like he did in his wins versus Samuel Vargas and Chris Algieri, where he scored some brilliant KOs against them. But can he do it against a much bigger Chris Eubank Jr.? This is heated. This is a rivalry. There's been bad blood, eggs smashed against one another's face. They had that Piers Morgan press conference where Piers was instigating it, saying, "Oh, your father, this, Chris, and all that." And Chris Eubank Jr. is like, "I don't care about my father. I'm here to fight for myself. I fight for my own legacy." Where Conor Benn is, saying, "I'm sorry for the relationship of your father." And Chris Eubank deads it and he goes, "I don't care about what you say about me." And Conor seems he's trying to be genuine in that moment, but Chris is just like, he's trying to show no signs of weakness. There's, as much as this is a boxing fight, this is a mental battle going into it, a mental warfare between both guys like their fathers had. There's that legacy. There's these 2 guys, the egos they have. Neither man wants to lose this. This is as big as a world title bout. Some of the key things to note about this bout: it'll be fought at 160 pounds with a 10-pound hydration clause. Conor Benn fights, he's fought at 150, he's fought at 154 recently, but he normally fights at 145, 146. He fights at welterweight, so he's jumping up 2 weight divisions to middleweight. Chris Eubank, on the other hand, fights at 160, 168, super middleweight or middleweight. This fight will be at 160. They have to weigh in on the Friday. On the Saturday, on the day of fight night, they cannot balloon up over 10 pound. There's a 10 pound hydration clause on this fight. Most recently, Ryan Garcia fought Gervonta Davis, if I remember correctly. That had a hydration clause, and we saw how Ryan Garcia, he just looked a bit diminished in that fight, and he got rocked quite a few times. I'm pretty sure he got him with a body shot, did Gervonta Davis, and he kind of went to a knee, did Ryan Garcia. But we've seen what these hydration clauses can do. They make your chin more susceptible because you can't balloon back up and get all that water back into you. You're still a bit depleted going into the fight. So that's a huge thing to note for someone like Eubank Jr. who's going to be cutting the weight, where for Conor, it's going to be an easy making weight for him. He probably weighs only 175. He's going to cut literally nothing. Whereas Chris Eubank Jr., allegedly his recent fight in Saudi Arabia, he struggled to make weight there. You saw him, apparently there was reports of, him in the heat running just to cut those few extra pounds that he needed to. He was struggling to make the weight, but he made the weight. He's a professional, and I think there'll be no issue. He'll make the weight on it'll be the rehydration clause and what impact that has in the fight. I'm going to give you my keys to victory for both guys and then kind of maybe give you a final prediction. Chris Eubank Jr., his keys to victory: he's the more older and more experienced, and he's had the experience against the better fighters. Use this to your advantage. Use your IQ, Yes, Eubank Jr. is athletic. Yeah, he's powerful. Yeah, he's strong, but he's old. He's got those years on him. He's 35 years old. But use that experience from the Billy Joe fights, the Liam Smith fights, the Liam Williams fights, all the fights that you've had over the years. Use that to your advantage. The George Groves fights, use that knowledge and experience against someone who's ferocious like Conor Benn, who's trying to rip your head off. Get him tired, tie him up, use the clinch to your advantage, weigh on him. You're the heavier of the guys. The one thing about Chris Eubank Jr., if it's not an entertaining fight, I feel like that benefits Eubank Jr. I feel like Eubank Jr. wants it to be perfect. He wants it to be a polished fight. Keep him on the end of your jab, land with the right hand, stick him, come in 1-2, drop him. We see it, the famous fight. Liam Williams was a good fight for Chris Eubank Jr. It was one of his best performances. He had Roy Jones Jr. in his corner where he done damage early to Liam. And he dropped him, I think, in the first, second and fourth. And he was just piecing up on him. And then when it got into the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, I think he dropped him against in the 10th. But he just kind of took his foot off the gas from that early kind of onslaught that he done to Liam. And a lot of people were like, Eubank, why didn't you take out Liam Williams? You should have put him away, this, that, and the other. But that's kind of how he fights. Yeah, he can drop you. Yeah, he can be flashy. But it's conserving his energy, fighting smart, fighting patiently, not putting yourself into an area of danger. I think that's going to be for Chris. key for Chris Eubank Jr. He doesn't want to get into a firefight with Conor Benn. Conor Benn, he hasn't shown the power recently and he's coming up 2 weight divisions. So he probably won't have as much power. But it's not the power I don't trust of Conor Benn. I feel like he won't have as much power. It's the rehydration clause and the chin of Chris Eubank Jr. where that rehydration clause, can you still take a hit when you're still a bit depleted? I'm not too sure. I've seen fighters who've, drained themselves and then they have these rehydration clause in and they're just more chinnable. So that's another thing. But he needs to use his weight and his size to his advantage even without that hydration clause and just make it a bit less of a boring fight. Let's just call a spade a spade. I want it to be a Dragon War and a Rock'em Sock'em Robots. But the more boring it is, the more it will benefit someone like Chris Eubank Jr. Also, just keep him on the end of your jab. Don't let him get in close. Don't let him, fight within and throw his combinations. We've seen it time and time again. Conor Benn, when he's had his recent success in his KOs, he's landing a flurry of punches and he's backing up his opponents against the ropes. And once he's got him up against the ropes, that's when he can land those damaging combinations. If he's not hitting you with the 1, 2, 3, he's hitting you with the 4 and 5. He had that brilliant KO, I think it was against, was it against Vargas or Algieri, where he just lands a brilliant 1-2 down the middle. But those guys are much smaller, so maybe Eubank can just take a bit more of that power coming the other way. As for Conor Benn, his keys for victory, make it an ugly fight, let your hands go. That I think is going to be key for him because he's going to have to take a jab and take a shot to come in because he's the smaller guy, 5'8", shorter reach. So he's going to have to take a hit, but once he takes a hit, rip to the body, go upstairs with the hooks, land that uppercut. I will give credit to Eubank. He's got a good uppercut as well. He dips his body in his head and he just comes up with that uppercut. I'm pretty sure he landed a good one against Liam Smith to drop him in their second fight. But make it ugly, get dirty in that pocket and just weigh on him and just smash on him. Back him up like Liam Smith did, the Liam Smith fight. The one thing Liam did, he got him up against that corner. And then in the 4th round, he started teeing off on him, I think he landed a flurry of punches and he lands a right hand here and then it's like an uppercut which follows, if did Liam Smith, if I remember correctly. But he got him in danger when he backed him up against the corner. And Liam Smith isn't a pretty big middleweight. So for Conor Benn, that should give him a lot of, I forgot the word, confidence. It should give him confidence that he can do damage. If Liam Smith can KO him, and Liam Smith isn't the biggest of guys, he can probably do the same. I think Eubank Jr. has fought some much bigger guys and bigger, harder hitters than Liam Smith, but Liam Smith caught him on a flurry of punches and, got him down and dropped him. And then obviously followed up with the TKO where he couldn't handle it no more, could Chris Eubank. So that should give Conor Benn confidence, knowing that if I do back him up against the ropes or I do back him up against the corner, he's susceptible to get hit. The one thing about Conor Benn, this guy is an aggressive, angry guy, even outside of fighting. Just when he's just like at the press conference, anything you name about Chris Eubank Jr., he's angry. But Chris Eubank's got under his skin. He's lobbed an egg off him. He's cussing him out, cussing out his dad, cussing out his family and whatnot. And the one thing, he needs to have calculated aggression, not just like raw aggression where he's just going at him. He needs calculated aggression where he's going at Chris Eubank Jr. and looking to kind of take him out smartly rather than use up all his energy early on and then just kind of be diminished and be picked off by Eubank Jr. later in the fight. Another thing I'd say, shot selection for Conor Benn is key. Picking the right punches and just not going head hunting. Go to the body and then go upstairs, double up with the jab, come up with the right hand. His shot selection is key. Recently he's shown, like, since the drugs test, and I think he popped, and I think he must have been taking something to be popped, but that's how I operate on. But he's lost power, it seems, since the drug test. He was fighting up in weight, but he is going to be fighting up in weight in this fight, the heaviest he's fought. Will he have the same power or will he be sluggish? Will he be a slower fighter? The speed is his advantage. He's the smaller guy, but will it be an advantage? Without the PEDs on his side, maybe. Who knows? If he's just landing on the guard, will he tire himself out against the bigger Chris Eubank? So his shot selection is key. Doesn't need to tire himself out. He needs to have calculated aggression. Another key for him, use Eubank's overconfidence against him. His guard is very low. You know, he has his lead hand very low, does Chris Eubank Jr., which is why Liam Smith was able to catch him. He keeps his lead hand low, so if he doesn't have his guard tight, there's a chance that, you know, Conor can come over with the right hand and take him out, because that's what Liam Smith did. He let him be overconfident, let him kind of feel like he's the better man, and then once he's in that position, once he drops that hand, there's your opening to try and go get him, or soften him to the body, and then he'll just naturally drop that hand, and then you can come upstairs, because he does have this lead hand. He doesn't have a tight guard. His right's here and his left's like here, because he's floating it out with the jab. And if you watch Chris Eubank Jr. fight, it's not tight up here. It's about here. Sometimes he can get it up, and sometimes he doesn't even have it up. Sometimes he has it here and he's getting clipped, i.e. the Liam Smith fight. But that's kind of my kind of breakdown of the fight and kind of giving you the kind of details surrounding it. How do I think this fight is going to go? Gosh, this is a very difficult fight to predict. Had there been no rehydration clause, I probably would have just gone, yeah, Chris Eubank Jr. wins this due to the size, due to the experience, and due to the athleticism he has. But it's that rehydration clause that I just don't know. Will he be diminished on fight night? You don't want a fighter going in there on fight night diminished, because it just kind of takes away from their performance, but it also endangers their lives. You know, boxing is not a sport to play around with. When you're wearing these huge gloves, these are killers, man. Like, punching someone like this, yeah, we watch bare knuckle. If you ever watch bare knuckle, you watch that and you're like, oh my God, this is brutal. But the chance of them actually like getting brain injuries is not that big, because their hands aren't big enough. They're like, the knuckles, the bones will probably break before you can, you know, do damage to their brain. But these gloves, they add all this extra weight and you can just do damage. And with that rehydration clause, is he going to be able to take a shot as he normally can? I'm not too sure. I think Conor might be sluggish in this fight, just because he's going to be fighting a bit heavier than he usually fights. Plus, since the PEDs, he has looked a bit slower and he's not had the same pop in his shots. But I think I'm going to go with Chris Eubank Jr. doing enough to edge a decision. I think Conor Benn will have moments of, you know, getting it into a firefight and taking it into war and maybe even dropping him. But I think Chris Eubank will do enough to keep him at range, use smart boxing to win a decision. He's the much more experienced. He's the much better fighter from what we've seen over the time. Conor's got a lot of hype, but I think coming up with this big in weight for someone who's 5'8" and quite a small frame, I just think it's going to be too much for him to handle. Had there been no rehydration clause, I'd probably go Chris Eubank Jr. definitely. But I'm going to put my soft prediction on Chris Eubank Jr. winning a decision. I think he'll do enough over the course of the fight to win all the rounds. I think Conor Benn will be the more exciting early on, but Chris will slowly take over the fight and do the damage. We saw how that Frenchman done damage early on in his career, where he had his face puffed up. If Chris Eubank can land the jab, land the right hand, and slowly bruise up and swell the eyes of Conor Benn, he'll take over the fight and do the better damage. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Do you think Chris Eubank will win? Do you think Conor Benn will win? Let me know your prediction and thoughts in the comments down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe for more MMA and fight content coming soon. And if you want to see more boxing content, let me know. More than happy to make the boxing content. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next one.